Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about, as far as the government is concerned, of course, there's been some debate on, we've seen electoral reforms also, and we've also seen some headway as far as reform on NAB law is concerned. Two of the major areas where the government was saying that they wanted to legislate, they wanted to go ahead and conduct the reforms before any elections pursuant to whatever the parliament decides take place, and after those amendments have now been adopted, of course, after the Senate they go through the Senate also, we will have these amendments in place. And what are the effects of these amendments as far as overseas Pakistani is concerned, as far as electoral reforms overall are concerned, as far as EVMs are concerned, and their likely effect on the future elections? We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about NAB law and, of course, the amendments on NAB law that we have seen. We've seen back and forth debate on it. We've seen the government's point of view. We've also seen a lot of criticism come from PTI. Of course, they were the ones to bring in reform on EVMs and overseas Pakistanis, which are some of the major changes in electoral reform. So we'll be talking about both of those today. I have with me Yasir Latif Hamdani, who's a lawyer, also an activist. Thank you so much for being with us, Yasir. We also have with us Siddiqul Farooq from the PMLN. Thank you so much for being with us today. Barrister Muhammad Ali Saif, who is with the PTI. Thank you so much for being with us, Barrister. Thank you for joining us. And we have with us Kamran Murtaza, who is a senator with JUIF. Thank you so much for being with us. Yasir, to start off with, let's talk about electoral reforms, and two of the major contentions in those electoral reforms have been EVMs and also the right of voting as far as overseas Pakistanis are concerned. How do you look at these two major amendments that have now, what are the effects and what are the major amendments? Because there's some debate on whether overseas Pakistanis do have the right at this time or they don't also.
Right. As far as the first question is concerned of EVMs, it's not that the government has said that there wouldn't be any EVMs. The government has said that in the by-elections they're going to put in place a system, a pilot project, to actually see if EVMs actually work or can be put in place efficiently. So that's the first thing. As far as the vote for overseas Pakistanis is concerned, anyone who has a NICOP is eligible to vote because he's a citizen or she's a citizen. But what is going to be the case in this or coming forward in any election going forth, that would be anyone who has to vote here, stand in the line and vote. There wouldn't be I-voting or postal ballots. There's nothing in the law that allows for that at the moment, and the integrity of the ballot will always be a question if that happens, unless, of course, they can come up with a foolproof I-voting system. Now, the amendment that has been brought in actually does say that I-voting is something that they would also look into. So it's not that the vote for overseas Pakistanis has been taken away. The fact is that they've taken nobody can take away the vote, for example, for one thing, but the issue of them being able to vote from abroad, that is still something that the government is considering. It's not necessarily closed.
Okay. Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Barrister Muhammad Ali Saif. Barrister Saab, there is, I hope you've been hearing what Yasir Saab has been talking about as far as these amendments are concerned. Can you hear me, first of all? Sorry, I think there's a problem with audio. Siddiqul Farooq Saab, can you hear me? Siddiqul Farooq Saab, I think you need to unmute. No, you can't hear me? Okay, yes, I think there's a problem with audio overall. So you're saying that we were not ready, even though these were already in law as far as EVMs are concerned, as far as right of voting to overseas Pakistanis is concerned. When we talk about technology, I mean, technologically speaking, we weren't ready for them anyway.
We're not ready for them at the moment, but we will be. I mean, after all, that is where the world is heading. We are going to have I-voting and ballots, postal ballots is something that happens all around the world.
Right.
So I don't see that not happening, but it has to happen with a certain plan in mind, and that's what the ECP or the Election Commission of Pakistan wants to do, is try it out in the by-elections first.
Okay, so there was a right. So there was criticism from the opposition then, you know, PMLN at this time also, and other opposition parties, PDM now, saying that you know, this was too early and that this legislation was bulldozed anyway, and that we were not ready for it. And you would agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think any step, any such, because we've seen that EVMs are not a foolproof system. The greatest example of EVMs, the malfunction of EVMs, was the 2000 election, 2000 in the US, where EVMs were part of voter fraud.
Okay.
So something like that happening in Pakistan with our fragile democracy would be a disaster. So I think I would certainly agree with those who say that we were not ready, that these amendments were bulldozed, and sorry, not the amendments, the legislation.
The legislation was itself. Let me come back to you. We have with us Kamran Murtaza, who's a senator with JUIFG. Kamran sir, what is your take on now at this time, this move, you know, the amendments to these crucial pieces of legislation? Let's talk about the electoral reforms, particularly at this time, in these two provisions.
Electoral reforms, on the original position has been restored. Two provisions have been, as it was decided with the consent of PTI in the year 2017. PTI enhanced that bill was passed. So it is not that the original provision was restored. So even if the PTI has an objection on restoration of original provisions, then they have to sit in the parliament and not to sit out, receive the salaries without.
Overall, in terms of the arguments for and against, can you hear me? In terms of Kamran Sahab, overall, in terms of the arguments for and against these amendments, which are now, you know, like you are saying, it's been reversed to the original position. As a lawyer, because, you know, Yasir is agreeing, he's saying that these were, you know, bulldozed in the assembly anyway, and we saw how it happened also. You know, some 31 or I think more than 31 provisions were then bulldozed into the legislation at the time that these electoral reforms took place. Would you agree that they should perhaps have been more deliberation on it? The process itself was perhaps too short?
Still, we welcome the PTI to sit in the parliament and make the suggestions. The bill, though has been passed from both the houses, but still it is with the president at the essence stage. So he can return it for further consideration. So the option is with PTI. If they want to give their input, they may sit in the National Assembly also and give their input.
Right. One, you know, of course, at this time, the position is that the position that PTI is taking is that they're saying that they don't agree.
Your voice is very low. Your voice is very low.
Ji, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but the voice is very low.
We'll try and reconnect again. So that you can get a better voice quality. Ji. Yasir, as far as overall the situation is concerned, as far as sitting, you know, we're talking about the fact that perhaps PTI can give their input in assemblies. But we've seen, you know, the argument coming from there is basically that, you know, they don't agree with the assembly at this time, they don't agree with the parliament, they want the elections to take place. That is the official statement at this time. The resignations also are pending. What is the legal position on that? Can you, I mean, as far as, of course, they haven't been accepted as yet. So, of course, you know, technically speaking, their members are still members. They can still come. They can still, you know, what is, I mean, can they revoke the legislations? Can they not be accepted? What is the legal position on that?
Well, they'll have to get a majority to revoke them.
Okay.
That's not going to happen. As far as the voting is concerned, as long as, so these would be considered the 170 odd, if those resignations are accepted, those would be considered abstentions.
Okay.
They would not be considered, that doesn't have any impact on the final result of the law, as that's at least how I understand the law, the parliamentary law. Yes.
Let me come back to you. Sadiqul Farooq Saab, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sadiqul Farooq Saab, there is a lot of criticism coming from the PTI. They're saying that, basically when you are saying that the overseas Pakistanis can come and vote here, but not having giving them the right to vote from overseas is something that's going to affect the vote bank of PTI. This is what the allegations are. The allegations are that this is a way to circumvent, their voters actually voting. What would you say to that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. PTI has always its own stance, whether it is right or wrong. But as far as I have observed, IK for the last so many years, he considers himself a global boss and who is always right. And for him, I think foul is fair and fair is foul. We also want to give right to our Pakistanis as far as possible, and when it is possible, we want to give them representation in the parliament. We have not refused it. We have committed it even in our manifesto. So, but right now, Election Commission is not prepared, and it has put forth so many reasons. So the Election Commission is prepared because it has to establish a police in hundreds of cities, whether Election Commission is in a position, and then to put there. We offered cooperation to PTI, Imran Khan, on election reform and other constitutional reform, but he didn't accept our cooperation. So now, our objective, our intention is very clear. We want to hold election, be fair, and for that we are committed. Let PTI come to the parliament, give its point of view, and if it is positive.
Sadiqul Farooq Saab, what are the chances, politically speaking, I mean, before we go into the amendments and the law of it, overall, what are the chances at this time, do you think, of PTI coming back to the parliament? We saw what happened as far as the march is concerned. There are a lot of theories as to whether it failed, how it failed, and what the plan is as far as Imran Khan Saab is concerned, but you still heard him say that he is going to come back with a date. First he had announced the 6 day, he's going to come after 6 days. Now that seems to have been amended by, he will give another date after 6 days, all of those things. But overall, considering the scenario at this time, do you think there's a chance that they will come back to the parliament? Because of course those resignations have not technically been accepted at this point.
In democracy, no one can give dictation. It is a dialogue, and if something is resolved, a question, a problem is resolved through dialogue, that is the way leading to democracy. But if, as I have already said, that if Imran Khan considers him boss and is in the habit of giving dictation, and he is always right, it is not democracy, and we will not accept his stand, his attitude, and his demand. If he believes in democracy and constitution, he should follow the constitutional path and come to the parliament.
But why was there so much urgency, Sadiqul Farooq Saab, as far as these electoral reforms were concerned on the part of the PDM and the PMLN?
Pardon?
Why was there so much urgency on your part to go ahead and have these reforms as soon as possible? On the one hand, we saw PTI bulldoze them. On the other hand, we saw you know, how quickly they were revoked by your party and the PDM as a whole?
No. First of all, as I have already said, that we offered him cooperation on electoral reforms and constitutional reforms, which he refused. Then, with one stroke of pen, let me say, 35 bills were passed just 1 hour. That was undemocratic approach. So he considers that whatever he thinks is right and that should be implemented, that is democracy. We are not going to accept it. We have brought it in parliament. We have revived the system which was already invoked. And if it is not interfered with, it ensures free, fair elections. As far
Right,
as
let me
vote,
come back to you, Siddiqul Farooq Sahib. I'm going to go to Kamran Murtaza. Ji, Kamran Sahib, can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
Ji, Kamran Sahib, overall, as far as the process is concerned, you know, I just want your overall comments on the process, because we saw the way that this legislation came into the parliament, you know, the time that it took, and the way that, of course, it was then revoked. Overall, do you agree that perhaps more time should have been given to both?
We have no objection if the PTI again rejoin the parliament, rejoin the National Assembly, and give its input in the National Assembly or in the Senate. But it is often of a party that they may sit in the House, they may not sit in the House. They therefore opted not to sit in a House, so in their absence a bill has been passed. So they cannot raise any objection at this stage or in this situation when they themselves opted not to sit in the House.
Right, fair enough. Let me come back to you. Yasir, let's talk about the NAB law. There has been a lot of criticism on NAB law, not just by you know, the PDM, which is, you know, PMLN, PPP. The PMLN when the PPP was in power, the PPP when the PMLN was in power, the PTI also when it was not in power. So, you know, for whether we agree or not, whether it has been used as a tool or not, the fact that it could be used, or the fact that, you know, all parties have at one time or the other asserted that it is being used against them. Do you think these amendments effectively end that kind of usage of NAB law?
Well, certainly, as far as the nature of the law is concerned, it is less draconian now.
Okay.
And the reason is, first, what you had was just absolute persecution of political opponents, and that was because you had a remand period of 90 days.
Okay.
That's been reduced to 14 days.
Okay.
That's a huge improvement. Now you wouldn't be able to put Miftah Ismail behind bars for 6 months just while you're investigating. Then you have then you have to produce the accused within 24 hours. That's a constitutional requirement which was not followed earlier.
Okay.
So that certainly improved. But most importantly, and these are just sort of the procedural jail issues or the persecution. But most importantly, what we have is the requirement for there to be a monetary benefit for it to attract the NAB provisions.
Okay.
So procedural lapses in, say, if there was a bureaucrat who was doing something, was you know, moving a file and there was a procedural lapse in it, that itself would not attract the NAB investigation.
Okay.
What will attract the NAB investigation is if there was some monetary, valuable monetary gain by a public official. Okay. Unless there is that, the NAB law doesn't come into play. I think that's a very positive thing. The reason why it's very positive is because what we've seen over the last 4 years is complete paralysis in the bureaucracy in Pakistan, especially in Punjab.
Okay.
Because everybody's absolutely scared of doing anything. There's complete inaction, complete analysis paralysis, as they call it. And so what now this law does is it gives protection to your civil servants, bureaucrats, etc. You know, basically allows them to do their job, and that's a massive net positive.
Yasir, one of the basic, you know, one of the main criticisms of NAB law was that it gives NAB basically NAB officials a carte blanche as far as, picking people up and then, investigating them, and that is endless. Like you said, that there was a 6-month period. And there's, statistically speaking, would you agree that, a lot of these allegations are never proven, where people have been, under NAB supervision or in jail or however you may call it, in custody for 6 months, more than 6 months, on occasion, where nothing has been proved against them. And that's happened, with different, it's about which government is in power and which government is not in power. And that doesn't happen, that the law doesn't allow that kind of persecution to happen anymore.
Yes. So that's precisely what the law has changed. And if you file a fake reference or a reference that is frivolous, you actually, there's a punishment that has been prescribed. I'm not sure what the punishment is, but it's substantial.
Okay.
So there's a substantial punishment if there was a false reference that was filed. And I think that would do away with the persecution, because what you have, it doesn't mean a private reference. It refers to all kinds of references.
Okay, I want to come to that. I'm going to go to Kamran Sahab. Kamran Sahab, but what happens to all those cases that are already under, investigation in NAB at this time after these amendments?
These cases will proceed under the new laws. Kindly appreciate we were for repealing of NAB laws because of its draconian effects. But still, the amendments have been made in the light of the judgments passed by superior courts. Otherwise, it is a gift of it was the gift of Musharraf regime, so it was required to be repealed.
But as far as I'm asking, does it have, is it going to be affected, all the cases that are at this time going on, are they going to be affected also, or does it only apply to cases that have been will be instituted after?
The cases at investigation stage, those cases will transfer to the relevant governors, while those cases in which the cognizance has been taken by the court will be proceeded under the old laws, under the old law.
So a lot of, let me come back to you. Sadiqul Farooq Sahab, as far as these amendments are concerned, there was across the board, Sadiqul Farooq Sahab, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sadiqul Farooq Sahab, there has been, a lot of criticism on NAB law. At this time, there is, even after the amendments have been made, we are still seeing criticism of these amendments again coming from the PTI. Overall, as far as the lasting effects of these amendments are concerned, don't you think, I mean, you've been, you're an experienced politician overall, I'm sure that, one would, most politicians have suffered as, at the hands of NAB. It doesn't matter which government, it doesn't matter what time, when you think about NAB law, and there has been the fact that these provisions, the draconian aspect of NAB law, like Yasir is saying, will be eliminated, at least diminished, if not eliminated, after these amendments. Do you think that, we can have agreement, across the board agreement on them?
First of all, MAHRUKH, as Sadiqul Farooq, I am before you an example, a living example of the victim, as a victim of draconian NAB laws. I was put behind bars for none of my crime. I served 5 years imprisonment, but released after 2 years. And after 11 years, I was given justice. Secondly, as my brother Kamran Murtaza has referred to the judgments of Supreme Court of Pakistan, that the NAB laws were against the spirit and letter of Constitution, against the teachings of Islam. That officer levels an allegation against any respectable citizen, and now he has to prove him innocent. He has to level allegation and put him behind bars. So in a civilized society, in a Muslim society, in the light of Quran and Sunnah, and in the light of our constitution, NAB law was totally a draconian law. So it has been amended in the set of the guidelines given in the judgments of the Supreme Court. And I think no one should object. But if one has positive recommendations, suggestions, according to Constitution, he should come forth and, and place it in the Parliament.
Right, let me come back to you. Yasir, there's also, as I understand it, the definition of asset is important because, we've seen a lot of cases under the guise of assets beyond means. And it's one of those, again, it's one of those provisions under which, anything and everything has been thrown. And there's been a lot of victimization. I don't think it would be wrong to say, across the board, all political parties, people from all political parties have suffered because of this asset beyond means, and then NAB, attracting NAB, and then, the investigation pursuant to that, and, at times political victimization because of that. Now, the definition of asset has changed, and it doesn't include your spouse or relatives anymore. How do you see this development?
Well, certainly, I think it's a positive step because in the case of Qazi Faiz Isa, we've seen how the assets of the spouse, as it were, become an issue and are misused by, to file a frivolous reference, as was the case.
Right.
And that was obviously not before NAB, but similar things have happened. But most importantly,
but is it in law also then? I mean, just to get my own facts straight, it's something, asset beyond means is not something that's only relevant to the NAB law. It's also relevant to, where does it come from, and does it attract other provisions of law also? How does it work?
Well, I think there is a question of declaring your assets.
Okay.
That's there in the election law as well, your candidature and that sort of thing. As far as assets beyond means is concerned, here within the ambit of the NAB law, what we see now with these amendments is that the onus to prove has now shifted.
Okay.
And this is what if I heard correctly, Mr. Sadiqul Farooq was also saying, that the onus probabendi, or the onus to prove, has now shifted to the prosecutors. That's very important. The prosecutors have to show that if there are these assets, that the person did not, the said accused did not have means to buy those assets or get those assets. So this is a very positive development. The golden thread of any justice system
but
is...
on the flip side, it does also allow, people to sort of escape liability, don't you think? Because of course we've also seen a lot of things transferred to the spouse and all of that, and this was added to sort of combat that, no?
Well, I think first of all, the onus should always be, because the golden thread of justice, as it were, is that person is innocent till proven guilty.
Right.
Now, whether I, for example, transferred my property or assets to my spouse in order to avoid prosecution or some such.
It shouldn't be for you to prove, it should be for NAB or the prosecuting
and that's
authority.
all that's happened.
Right, let me come back to you. We have with us Captain Jameel Ahmed Khan from the PTI. Jameel Saab, we're talking about amendments to NAB law, also electoral reform. Can you hear me first of all?
I can hear you.
Jameel Saab, as far as NAB law is concerned, we've not only seen, even your party and other people from other political parties across the board, we've seen people, suffer at the behest of NAB. There has been victimization, calls for victimization anyway, all over at one time or another. Do you agree with the amendments on NAB law at this time?
No, not at all. All these amendments are modifiedly amended. The reason is that right now the Parliament, which is again, it is a question on the legality of this Parliament, because of this Parliament has came into being as a result of a regime change, and Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf PTI have a clear version that we do not accept this government, which has been imposed on Pakistan as a result of regime change, now
Jameel Sahab, okay.
the present
Jameel
government.
Sahab,
No,
let me just
not the
interject
present
one
government,
second.
not the
As far as
present government.
I'm just going to clarify the question. You know, your narrative of the fact that, you know, you don't agree with this government, it's been imposed on, you know, all of those things, one side. But don't you think
Our amendments are mollified because these all amendments have been made to protect these corrupt leadership. They have made amendments as per their own wishes.
Jameel sir,
How
but
can
don't they protect your people also? Don't they protect all politicians across the board? And don't they protect people from being victimized by NAB, you know, being held in custody for months at a time, you know, being thrown into jail, cases being instituted against them, you know, under the garb of assets beyond means, all of those things. If the onus shifts on NAB of proof and all of those things, it will have overall a good effect on you know, politicians. It will allow them not to be victimized. It will allow the bureaucracy to function unhindered. You know, all of
Just
those things.
let me answer you. Let me answer you. Please give me just 1 minute now. No good can come out of such parliament which has been imposed. A leader of opposition. It's a joke here. The opposition which is right now in the parliament. It's just a joke because the person who is leader of opposition, he is seeking the ticket from Pakistan Muslim League Noon. He is the person who is looking towards the Prime Minister to give him the ticket for the next election. How can he be?
Did you leave any choice? Did the PTI leave any choice for, you know, there to be an election of the leader of the opposition? Why don't you? Why doesn't the
elections?
Why doesn't the PTI come back into the assembly?
How can we accept an
you know,
amendment?
say all of those things.
Which is, you know,
if you
this
don't
government
agree with the
is
amendments,
totally
you should come back into
illegal.
the
It is
assembly
imported.
and vote against them. Jameel Saab, why doesn't the PTI come back into the assemblies and vote against these amendments if you disagree with them so vehemently?
How can we come to an assembly? And that means we will accept this assembly which has been imposed as a result of a regime change.
The laws are being made regardless, right? The amendments are going through regardless.
We are standing against this conspiracy. This conspiracy has been with the entire nation. The entire nation is right now with Imran Khan, with PTI. The entire nation is on the streets. They are protesting on the streets, on the roads, because we do not accept the present parliament. It is an imposed parliament. We want new elections, fresh elections, and let the nation decide who is the right parliamentarian. Let them decide through elections. So any law made right now is mollified. It is to protect their own rights. It is to protect their own corruption. So any amendment, which even if is intended for good, is not acceptable because this parliament is not acceptable. So I think all the amendments are made to protect their own corruption, to protect their own interest. So I think, you see, it's not only the lab law. They have amended the election law also. They have denied the overseas Pakistanis from casting their votes. The Pakistanis who have sent $148 billion in the last 5 years, they have been denied the right of election because they are scared that the entire overseas will cast their vote for PTI. So it's all mollified. It's all mollified. I do not accept, and my party will not accept.
Let me come back to you. Sadiqul Farooq Sahab, I hope that you heard Jameel Sahab. He's saying that it's only been done as far as the electoral reform is concerned. He's saying that it's only been done because you are afraid that the overseas vote will go to PTI, and that is behind this electoral reform.
That is the
question about amendment in NAB law. Unfortunately, my brother Jameel Ahmad Khan also do not know the principles of justice enshrined in Quran and Sunnah. He also doesn't know the fundamental rights above enshrined in the Constitution. They just a slogan of Riyasat-e-Madina, but not know what Riyasat-e-Madina was delivering to its citizens and how it was delivering. Secondly, he says that the whole nation is in the streets and on the roads. We have seen on the 25th of May, the whole nation in Islamabad on the streets, in the streets and on the road. We have observed not more than 10,000 were with Imran Khan. And that's why he had to leave. And now he is hidden. He is hidden in KPK. He is hiding himself in KPK. The whole nation is with him. He should represent them here, but not. So these slogans will not serve. As the electoral reforms are concerned, we have reformed. We have just, I have already said that we have revived the system which was already in vogue. And if we analyze this system which is in vogue in Pakistan, it ensures free and fair elections. Of course, if one from here and there don't interfere with it.
Right. Do we have Kamran Saab with us? Ji, Kamran Saab, can you hear me? No, I don't think so. Ji, Yasir, other provisions, one of which is also, as far as the 6-month period, I think NAB has to be, it's now those cases which go to court after NAB investigation have a year instead of 30-day period.
Yes.
Do you think that's because, I mean, overall, of course, isn't a 30-day period more conducive to speedy justice? Why do you agree that it should be 1 year? How do you see that amendment?
No, I think you've, Maybe if you could look at the amendment again, that's not how I read it.
Okay, how do you correct me?
Yes, I might be wrong, but the amendment that I read actually limits the trial to 1 year, which is something that our courts, or at least NAB courts, haven't been able to do earlier.
Okay.
You have NAB references and NAB cases that go on for years.
You're saying that it's been
limited to 1 year.
Limited to 30 days.
To 1 year.
To 1 year.
Yeah.
And isn't it true that it was earlier 30 days?
I am not certain of that. I would have.
Okay, let's go to Kamran Saab. Kamran Saab, is it true that once a NAB case earlier on had to be, once it went to court, had to be decided in 30 days? Was that the legal position earlier on or no? Ji, Kamran Saab? Okay, Kamran Saab can't hear me. I'll find out more about that. I'm not sure. But you're saying that it's likely to be the other way, that it should be more speedier.
Yes.
So what happens if a NAB reference goes to court? According to you, is there a time limit on NAB investigating? Was there earlier on? Or?
Yes. Now that's the important thing. I believe that has been reduced. That period has been reduced. You have to have the investigation done. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it is 40 days, 45 days or 3 months or some period, but it has been reduced. Now there is a limit on how long you'll prolong.
All inquiries by NAB have now to be completed within 6 months, I think.
6 months, yeah.
Right.
So the period has been, there is a limit now.
Okay, there wasn't a cap limit.
There was no cap earlier.
And because of that, they could also keep people in custody for however long investigation took.
Yes, so 30 days remand and
then it would then be continued?
Yes.
So they had to go to court to get it extended, or it wasn't like that?
It could be extended only by court, yes.
Okay. Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Siddiqul Farooq Saab. Siddiqul Farooq Saab, as far as overall the political climate is concerned, at this time, it doesn't look like the PTI plans on returning. On the other hand, of course, the amendments are going forward. There's criticism also about the fact that, of course, you have, which is what Captain Jamil also said. He said that you have somebody as leader of opposition who's already, vowed loyalty to your party at this time. So that's not really effective opposition. Do you think that could become an issue later on?
What we need is majority and an opposition. Even if there is no opposition and there is majority in the House, that serves the purpose. Of course, it will not be an ideal situation, but as far as the legal requirement, constitutional requirement is concerned, that will be fulfilled. That's why, for creating an ideal situation, we are suggesting PTI leadership time and again to come to the parliament and represent their voters, their electorate, but they are not paying heed to our requests. So we can't help.
Right. I'll let Jameel Saab answer that. Jameel Saab, can you answer what Sadiqul Farooq Saab is saying? He's saying that, our hands are tied, we can't really do anything. We had to fulfill the constitutional requirement of having a leader of opposition, and that was the pool that we had to choose from. You left us no choice, and I think that's very fair. If you were in the parliament at this time, if Imran Khan Saab was in the parliament, what you're saying to me right now, the kind of arguments that you are giving, these arguments should be tabled in the parliament. And there should be that kind of sanctity of parliament, there should be that kind of across the board debate between political parties, which is essential to the parliamentary form of government, and we're not seeing that because PTI is not here.
We are very much on the streets. We have the right to protest. We are protesting, number one.
Right.
And we are not given the right to protest. We have been subjected to tortures, and lot of law enforcement agencies and the paramilitary people were subjected to tortures. We are not given the right to protest even the present situation, which is our democratic right. They talk of ethics, they are doing against the ethics, number one. Number two, sitting in the parliament means we accept this parliament. That we do not. I earlier said that this parliament have no ethical standing right now. It has been imposed. The members have been purchased. They have been offered money. The one who has been made the leader of opposition received bribes from these people in the form of money.
You've made your point, Jameel Saab, as far as the leader of the opposition is concerned. Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Yasir Saab, thank you for joining us. Sadiqul Farooq Saab, thank you for being with us. Kamran Murtaza Saab, thank you for being with us today. Overall, as far as the situation is concerned, we've seen, as far as electoral reforms are concerned, as far as NAB law is concerned, there is there has been across the board criticism, even if we leave the electoral reform aside, on which PTI has strong views. It wouldn't be wrong to say that as far as NAB law is concerned, there has been from time to time across the board agreement from all political parties on the draconian nature of it. There has been comments about that from the superior courts also. So these amendments overall are welcomed by and large by the legal fraternity. Also, as far as disagreement on them are concerned, as far as any arguments against them are concerned, whether it's electoral reform or the amendments to NAB law, one would hope that we would see that in Parliament. Unfortunately, that kind of sanctity of Parliament we have not seen in the parliamentary style of government in Pakistan. We do not see, and it doesn't seem likely at this point, that the PTI will come back to the assemblies. The fact that they're not here is allowing the government to go ahead and forge the legislation they want, go ahead and move the legislation that they want, and go ahead and legislate on issues that they feel are important, and of course they will go through. I think for the PTI, the important part for them to ponder on is who is the eventual loser here. If they're not in Parliament, are they losing out, or is the government losing out? Perhaps those things are worth considering, and they are considering those at this time, and let's hope that better sense prevails all round. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.